Good evening, everyone. My name is Cheryl Morse. I'm the director of the Center for Research on Vermont here at UVM. Together with Tom Helmstutler, our office coordinator, I'd like to welcome you to this evening's presentation titled Clean Energy Equals Jobs by David Blittersdorf and Beth Sachs. This seminar is the fourth presentation in the Center's Vermont's Energy Future series. With numerous changes in our state's energy portfolio, including the uncertain future of the Vermont Yankee nuclear power plant, changes in utility ownership, the advent of new renewable energy sources, and development of technologies to improve efficient use of electricity, the Center decided to offer multiple opportunities to discuss the various elements of our state's energy future. Each Wednesday, over a period of 5 weeks, we've been hosting a discussion of an energy-related topic. We began on March 14th with a keynote presentation entitled The End of Cheap Energy by nationally recognized energy commentator James Howard Kunstler. This event drew a very large audience, signaling Vermont's concern for our energy future. We're pleased that since that event, leaders such as UVM Interim President John Bramley, Vermont Attorney General William Sorrell, author Richard Watts, and Green Mountain Power CEO Mary Powell have joined us for these discussions. Next week, we will host the Commissioner of Vermont's Department of Public Service, Elizabeth Miller, and Vermont Representative Tony Klein, who will discuss the state's ambitious goal of reaching 90% of our state's energy from renewable sources by the year 2050. That presentation will take place in Billings North Lounge April 11th at 7:30, and we hope you can join us. We'd like to thank our co-sponsors, the Goodin Center for Ecological Economics, UVM's Clean Energy Fund, and the Environmental Program for their support of this series. We'd also like to note that the book that has motivated this series is called Public Meltdown, and its author is here, Richard Watts. And we have books for sale in the back of the room, and those do help benefit the Center for Research on Vermont Future series. RETN is our media partner. They film our programs, air them on channel 16, on cable channel 16, and make them available to watch digitally on their website, retn.org. Thanks to our film crew this evening. At this time, I'm very happy to introduce this evening's presenters. David Blittersdorf is founder of NRG Systems in 1982 and is now on his second entrepreneurial venture, AllEarth Renewables, which manufactures solar PV trackers that he has designed himself. He serves on the boards of several national and local renewable energy nonprofits and is on the board of advisors for the Union of Concerned Scientists, the Association for the Study of Peak Oil and Gas USA, and UVM's Rubenstein School of, you guys got to change your name, Rubenstein School of Environment and Natural Resources. No, you don't. It's a great name. I'm also happy to welcome Beth Sachs, who in 1986 co-founded with Blair Hamilton the Vermont Energy Investment Corporation. Vermont Energy Investment Corporation is a nonprofit organization that specializes in reducing the economic, social, and environmental costs of energy consumption. VEIC is internationally recognized for cutting-edge work helping federal, state, county, and municipal governments develop and achieve energy conservation, energy efficiency, and renewable energy goals and initiatives. VEIC employs more than 230 people across the country, headquartered here in Burlington. Beth she was the executive director until 2008. She's now responsible for furthering the mission and the values of the organization as the organization grows. And she's specifically focusing on energy policy and advocacy. So please welcome me and join me in welcoming Beth and David. Thank you.
If I touch this, is it going to droop? Okay. Okay. So I asked if I could go first because David was happy to, because I'm going to talk a little bit more about efficiency, and he's probably going to talk more about renewables, and I see efficiency as a bridge. And he also said he can refute everything I said, so we'll see about that. So thank you for having me here. And for the introduction, I did describe VEIC, which is a nonprofit that was started in 1986 with two of us. That's why that was the co-founder. And we now actually, because we're growing so quickly, have about 270 people. If the website says 230, that was last week. No, we're not growing that fast, not at all. And of those 270, about 230 are in Vermont. And to me, that's a story about tonight, about what we're talking about tonight, which is clean energy equals jobs. So I was looking at the title, Clean Energy Equals Jobs, a vision for Vermont's energy future and how that can lead to economic vitality, job growth, and cleaner energy. And I want to talk about the scope of what we're talking about when we talk about the need for energy efficiency in particular at the both national and state level, what the scope of that is, hopefully give you a sense of the urgency of it, and then talk about the role of markets and government in how we're going to get to a clean energy future. So I think that the future is about time. I think that for us to create a home for our children's children and their pets and the plants that they need to eat, we have to act faster and look further out than we've ever had to do before as a society. And we kind of suck at that. So I think that we'll talk some more about that in a few minutes. We don't take the long view, and I think that's what's hurting us so tremendously. There are two imperatives that we need to get to that clean energy future. We need a thriving economy, which includes productive jobs that pay salaries so that we all can support our households, and a clean, sustainable environment. The widely accepted international climate imperative is that we really need to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions by 80% by the year 2050. I don't know if you all have those kinds of numbers in your head, but that's the one that sticks with me. That's the one I believe. That's the one that climate scientists believe. And I think that what that means is that it has to guide our priorities today and our actions today. And by 2050, our heating, electricity, and transportation will have to be virtually carbon-free. We're going to have to decarbonize the grid and decarbonize how we heat. So how do we get there? David, I'm sure, will talk about renewables, and I'm going to start with efficiency. Efficiency is important because the efficiency is our cleanest energy source. The energy that we don't burn is the cleanest, or we don't use. It will play the leading role in giving us the time that we need to build a bridge that'll allow us to get to an energy in future that is powered by renewables. With that accepted greenhouse gas goal of 80% reduction by 2050, efficiency needs to provide about 30 to 50% of those reductions. So just efficiency alone that's where it has to pull its weight. That's what it needs. So that's the climate side. The economy side is efficiency is the cheapest energy source. So it's the cleanest and the cheapest. It costs a fraction of current energy supply. And what we spend right now in Vermont, anywhere in the United States, about 80% of the money that we spend on energy, in Vermont, leaves the state. While 80% of the expenditures that are devoted to efficiency stay in the state and stay in the local economy, and pay for local goods and services. High levels of efficiency also improve or stabilize and strengthen the economy because they improve our building infrastructure, they help maintain the viability of affordable housing stock, they lower our collective energy costs, and they reduce exposure to future fuel price escalation, and they create jobs. So to meet that 80% reduction, we have to work in all sectors. We have to work in buildings, transportation, industrial processes, everything that generates greenhouse gases. And I'm going to focus primarily on buildings because that's what I know best. I'm sure that someone talking about transportation, or you have had some other speaker series going on addressing transportation. Although I do think we need to look at it all together at some point, or we're screwed. So we were asked by someone who worked for President Obama early in his administration and got booted out for all the right reasons. A few years ago, a man named Van Jones, if anyone's heard of him, he was just an amazing organizer and motivator. He said, he was visiting Vermont, and he said, could you tell me tonight, send me an email, and let me know how much it would cost to weatherize or do energy improvements to all of the homes in the United States, how much that'll cost, how much it'll save, and how many jobs it will create. And we said, sure, get right back to you. So we did, and we calculated that if we were to make 75% of the buildings in the country 35% more energy efficient, that'll cost about $2.1 trillion, and it would create about 19.7 million jobs. That 2.1 trillion, that's a lot of money, and we need it now, even though what happens with energy efficiency is you pay for it now, and you save the money over the life of the measures, whereas most other energy sources you pay for the improvements over time, or the investments over time. So if we want to scale this back to Vermont, a typical Vermont home heats, will spend about $2,200 for heat this year and about $1,000 for electricity. If 80% of that leaves the state, that means that more than $700 million will leave the local economy just for residential energy use. And then if you look at the state's energy goals, which the legislature created in 2008, they said that they wanted to get 80,000 of Vermont's homes to weatherize and to save 25% by the year 2020. And that alone would cost Vermont about $800 million, generate about 650 jobs, and even that very ambitious, but unfortunately, pathetically, woefully short goal, we're not anywhere near meeting it. It was passed in 2008, it's 2012, we're nowhere near meeting that goal. And it's not nearly enough. It's not nearly enough to meet that 80% in 2050. So, so we need to save closer to, most energy efficiency work saves 20-25% in the house. We need to save 50 or 75%. We don't even, and we know how to do it, but we don't. We just don't, and it's urgent. So the real and present threat to our climate makes time matter a lot. And I think markets have a huge role in delivering the products and services that we need, but they don't, and they can't and won't, in my opinion, act fast enough. We're going to have to I think we need mandates, regulation, incentives that come from government. I don't think we can do it alone. I don't think the market can do it alone. And David, you can have at that when you get up here. I've come to believe that voluntary programs and incentives in the marketplace, as valuable as they are, can't induce the deep changes that we need. And it'll take bold policy leadership and regulation to do what needs to be done at the necessary speed that it needs to be done in. And I'll give you an illustration. On average, most of us Americans will live in the house we live in now for a total of 5 to 7 years. That's the average across the country. Homeowners make reasonable, rational decisions about what to invest in their homes in terms of energy efficiency and renewable energy based on being in the home for 5 to 7 years, that time frame. And so they're looking typically for a payback of 5 to 7 years. But from a societal perspective, it's serious underinvesting. If we could put all of the people who are going to own that home in one room, all the people who are going to own that home for the next 30 years in one room, they would make a very different set of decisions based on economics of the group collectively than any of us will make in any of those 5 to 7 year increments that we live in those homes. And we can't do that. So that's where I think government has to come in and act on behalf of the present and future citizens to help make those decisions now. One of the ways, so we need policies, and we need the markets, and we need the technologies, and we need a whole lot of money, and we need a whole lot of people to do the jobs. I think that has anyone ever heard of PACE, Property Assessed Clean Energy? It's a financing mechanism that will hopefully provide a way for people to pay for this stuff. These are all examples of, brilliant leadership. A report came out last week from the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics that says that green goods and services, which they define as those jobs that are found in businesses that produce goods and provide services that benefit the environment or conserve natural resources, accounted for that green jobs were 3.1 million of those jobs in the United States in 2010. That represented 2.4% of the total employment that year. And guess what? Vermont was the leader. Not in total number, but in per capita. Vermont ranked highest in the nation for the proportion of green goods and services employment at 4.4%, compared to a national average of 2.4. And California, which had the largest number, which only had 2.3. So in doing this energy efficiency, that's going to be the bridge that's going to get us to a renewable powered future. It's going to take all different kinds of people and all different kinds of jobs. One of the things that we did in this Recovery Act since 2008 was to train lots and lots of weatherization workers. Everyone wants to be an energy auditor. We need one energy auditor for 10 people who can actually install the insulation and do the carpentry and do the electrical. And then we also need program managers at a much smaller level, and we need administrators, and we need policymakers, and we need regulators. So we need, a full spectrum, and we need to just keep all of those different kinds of skills in mind. A lot of them are incredibly valuable. It would be wonderful if weatherization craft workers were able to support households on those jobs. It's a good job, it's an honest job, and it's a dirty job. But we need hundreds and thousands and millions of them if we're going to make this transition. And lastly, I just want to say, we don't have to deal with this now. We don't have to, but not doing so is going to come at a huge cost, huge turmoil. It'll hurt the people who have the least ability to deal with it hardest and first. If we don't address this as nations and as a planet, I think we'll be facing chaos, and I think we already are. I think all of these extreme weather events that some of the smartest people I know still say, oh yeah, we won't have another flood like that in Vermont for another 100 years. It's just, you all, maybe you're here because you know that and you know it's true, but climate change is happening to us now, and if we don't, it's happening whether we do something about it or not. And it's just how it happens and how we rationally plan for it that is going to make the difference. So that's what I have for now. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Beth. No. I'm just going to take off from what you said, and I think you were exactly right, and I agree with you that we have no time. Our energy situation is critical, but we in Vermont, we in the United States, we in the world are in utter denial of what our problem is. And if hopefully most of you saw James Howard Kunstler's talk, because he frames it pretty well. We're in really deep trouble, and we don't have time. And as Beth said, we have a massive amounts of efficiency work to do, conservation work, and then renewables, because the efficiency, conservation, and renewables is our future. No more fossil fuels. We're going to be running out. Actually, May of 2005 was the year of peak oil. So we have less oil going forward than we have had in the past. So we have peaked in oil production. And why is that really important? 40% of our energy in the world, United States, is oil. Other 20-some percent natural gas, another 20-some percent coal. So about 90% of what we're living on today is fossil energy, but that's all going into decline. First oil is going into decline, natural gas next, and then coal. By the year 2100, we will not be burning more than probably 10% of what we have today for fossil fuels, because that's all that's going to be left. That's not a long time away considering where we are today, less than 90 years. And we've been in a fossil world for basically 200 years. But fossil energy is only 200 years in the life of the world. So we've lived in this world all this time without fossil energy. So basically, we won the lottery, and we're spending fossil energy just like lottery winners spend the winnings. And you know what happens to lottery winners? They all go bankrupt. And we're doing the same thing. So that's sort of framing things. Energy in the world today is a $6 to $7 trillion a year industry. That's how much oil we take out of the ground, coal we mine, natural gas that we take out of the ground. They're basically extraction industries. We're mining all these things that have been there for millions of years. And it's $6 to $7 trillion. Beth talks about a little over $2 trillion to do some really deep efficiency in the United States, $2 trillion. Well, the United States spends about $1.5 trillion a year on fossil energies. We spend it year in and year out because we have to burn it and then get it again next year and the year after and year after. But we aren't going to keep doing that. We're going to go to renewables. We have to, and time is short because we're on the decline side of fossil fuels. In Vermont, switching to Vermont, here we are, a really, really small state. One of the smallest as far as energy use. We consume about, when you take all the oil, gas, imported fuels, and electricity, we use about the equivalent, about 2,000 megawatts of equivalent energy. Our electric demand is about 700 average megawatts. Well, California, just in their electricity, is over 30,000 megawatts. So we're quite teeny. New York State, over 25,000 megawatts. So here we are as this tiny state. And the reason I'm a little bit hopeful about what we can do in Vermont and create a vision for Vermont is we are so small that if we're going to make efficiency work, conservation work, and renewables work, and switch how we use and produce energy, we're probably the example for the rest of the United States and the world. Other places in the world, an island in Denmark has done this. They've shown that you can go to 100% renewables and have high efficiencies and run a small island and be self-sufficient. I think we can do that in Vermont. So getting back to Vermont, we're small. We have a huge potential of doing stuff here. We have a low population density, and we have some really good natural resources. We have sun, we have the wind, we have hydro, we have some biomass, but we're not going to cut down all of our forests to burn wood for electricity. Probably not going to happen. Our biggest resources are wind and solar. We have some hydro left to do, but not a lot. So my vision of where we're going to go is we have to electrify our economy. We have to electrify our energy system. We're going to get off of the liquid fuels of oil, gas, and the hard fuel of the solid fuel of coal. We don't burn much coal here, but those fuels are all the past. And we have a problem. What are we going to heat our homes with? What are we going to drive our cars with? Well, I don't believe in 30 years we're going to be driving cars. That's like the American dream, that You know, everybody has a right to drive a car, but we're not going to be driving around 2,000, 3,000 pound vehicles with one person. We're going to electrify our energy system. We're going to have electric trains, electric buses, and we're going to have to do mass transit even in a rural state. We're going to have to relocalize. We're going to have to move into the towns and cities. And part of electrification is it's a heck of a lot more efficient to move someone on an electric train than even a diesel-powered train. Because diesel-powered trains are just diesel engines that run a generator, and it's electric drive. It's just that they waste 70% of the diesel fuel, getting the electricity for the motors on the train instead of using overhead wires. So we're going to make our systems much more efficient because we're going to use electricity. And the neat thing about using electricity is all of our renewable resources are basically electricity technologies. Solar PV is electric technology. Wind is mainly electric technology. And we're going to use these renewables to power this electric economy. We're going to heat probably with electricity with ground source heat pumping. We're going to do transportation, as I said, electrifying as much as we can. The buildings will become much more efficient and use these different electric technologies. So we're going to have to invest a bunch of money in this change in our systems. Right now, we're spending $3 to $4 billion a year in the state of Vermont for our energy. It's going to go up. As oil prices go up, we're, as Beth said, sending 80 cents on the dollar out of the state. So we're sending out about $3 billion a year when we should be producing the jobs and the products, the wind turbines, the solar systems here in Vermont, putting them here in Vermont and keeping the money local because it does recycle. So getting to jobs, it turns out when you're in a mining industry, like the oil and gas and coal industry, you don't have a lot of jobs for the amount of energy that you mine out of the ground because you're basically, it's like going to the bank and taking money out of a vault. That's all we're doing with fossil fuels. We're getting this stuff out of the ground. All we have to do is get it out of the ground and burn it. Renewable technologies are all real-time energy technologies that are collected every day. So the wind turbines, the solar panels, the cells are all collection devices that have to be built, they have to be maintained, and they're actually a lot less energy intensive. In other words, it takes a lot more solar cells and wind turbines to produce the energy we're used to than taking a lump of coal out of the ground or a barrel of oil. And just to enforce that point, today at $4 a gallon for gasoline, and we talk about the $100 a barrel oil, but a cup of oil still only costs us 15 cents. And bottled water is more expensive than that. And this stuff is going to be gone, and we aren't going to have it in our future. So oil is way undervalued. And the newer technologies are going to cost more. So as Beth said, we're going to need incentives. We're going to need government mandates. We're going to have a policy change. And here I am, a business person for the last 30-some years, but I believe we need government policy to drive things the right way because our free market system will not respond fast enough. By the time we're in deep crisis, it'll be too late. And we're almost there. I think we are there. So we're going to have to change the laws and look ahead and do it a lot quicker. And just to wrap up on jobs, as Beth said, the jobs are going to be hands-on jobs. We're still going to have admin jobs, lawyers, and finance people, but most of our jobs are going to be the hands-on installation of this equipment, the renewable, the wind turbines, the solar panels, and that's where most of the jobs are going to be. We're going to have to do it that way. So thank you very much.
What we'd like to do now is open up for questions and discussion. So Beth and David will sit up in the front here, and I may repeat the questions over the mic because this room has some interesting sound dynamics, and then they'll respond to your questions and comments. Tom.
So James Kunstler said, we've already squandered so much of our money, we're not going to have money for the renewables, just to build these wind turbines and these photovoltaic panels. And so he didn't really talk much about conservation and efficiency. He did at the very end when he just talked about relocalization and all. But how do you respond to his claim that we're not going to have the resources to be able to develop the renewable energy infrastructure and the stuff, the towers and the blades and the transmission systems and all?
Or the oil, if we don't do those, build the renewables, we won't have the oil either. So what will we do? I mean, it's a pretty bleak scenario. From his perspective, what would he, did he have solutions?
Yeah, he brought up a very good point, because what I think happened in 2008 with the economic crisis was that event that we just went through was where the infinite world of money collided with the finite world of oil and resources. And our economic system is designed for infinite growth forever. So I think he's right. Eventually we won't have the capital. But we have this opportunity right now, that right now there's a heck of a lot of money out there, but we shouldn't be spending it on SUVs. During the 2008 crisis, I wanted to see the government force GM Chrysler out of business and have them build rail cars and a train system, not cars. Look what we did. We bailed them out, and we're now building cars again, which is the wrong thing. So I think there's enough capital out there, but the government policy and mandates have to drive it. Just like World War II, we told General Motors, you're building airplanes, you're building tanks, you're building other things. No cars were ever built. We had that opportunity. I think that opportunity is going to show up again. But I'm really concerned about how our modern economic system works. It's a house of cards. So it's a problem.
So SunCom is exciting a lot of people now by offering solar equipment in a lease agreement. Do you think a lot of other companies are going to be doing things like that soon?
Yeah, the leasing way, or using leases to fund solar or wind, all renewables technologies are capital equipment upfront because of their energy collection devices. So it's, basically your cost is over 90% upfront cost. Compared to fossil technologies, all you have to do is have something that will burn this stuff, and it's low cost, but your long-term costs are much higher. So the methods of using tax incentives, all the government policy to drive that you can finance the leases is very, very important. So that's really the future of solar right now, is the leasing or power purchase agreement ways of buying it, so that the consumer can get in at very low upfront costs. It's like leasing a car. So you'll see a lot more of that.
I don't need to answer that. He did it.
Oh.
I'm sure we'll talk money some more.
On the same lines as this gentleman's question. When we talk about being at peak oil, or when we make our predictions regarding how fast we have to move, I hear a lot of talk about the burning of the oil, but what about the use of fossil fuels in the actual construction of, say, solar panels, for example? Are we factoring that in to our projections?
Yeah, you're bringing up a very good point, and that is something that I'm always concerned about when we talk about energy systems going forward, alternative fuels, biofuels, and so on. The thing that we look at is the energy returned on energy invested in any technology. A modern wind turbine will return 50 to 100 times more energy than it takes to build it and operate it for its life. It's one of the most productive new sources of energy. A modern solar installation is about 10 to 1. Wind turbines 50 to 1 times. Solar is 10 to 1, getting better. So it's really critical to have that ratio up above at least 5 to 1. Ethanol is 1 to 1. It's the stupidest thing we've ever done. It's a waste of resources. But look how it happened. You know, the incentives were in place. We wanted to replace gasoline. Shouldn't be doing this. So any fuel or any source that doesn't have a very high energy profit, that ratio we shouldn't be doing because it's a dead end. 1 to 1 is a real dead end. There's some things we're doing that are less than 1. But we have to look at all these things into the future. Nuclear power may be less than 1 when you look at the life cycle of storing the waste and everything. So why would we do these things? Because it's going to cost us more energy than we ever produce. So that's why large wind right now is cheaper than any other renewable, because it has a very good energy return on energy invested. But those are very important things to keep looking for, but it gets lost in the noise sometimes that people don't look at that, but that's really, really important.
You talked about mandates and government intervention, so let me ask both of you, could you suggest the single thing you think that would do the best job at the national level and at the regional level in that regard?
Want some time to think? I think that a tremendous amount of the energy that we use comes from heating buildings and powering buildings. And I think that if we created a mandate, a standard for energy use in buildings and implemented it over time, that's probably one of the most important things we can do. Germany has set something like this up where they have an energy standard that by a certain time all buildings have to meet. And it didn't go into play immediately. It's phased in over time, meaning that you have incentives that are in place for a while. So you say, okay, all buildings have to meet this energy standard in 2020. Between 2012 and 2020, there are incentives available. There's technical assistance available. So that there's as someone put it, you put people between a rock and a hard place and give them somewhere soft to land. And that's in place long enough that people know it's coming. And in 2020, then the standard kicks in and that's the law. So I think that's one of the most compelling policies that I think can be implemented at the national or state level.
On the national, international, or even the state level, the number one thing is taxing carbon. We need to tax carbon at probably $100 a ton or more. In the United States, that would raise almost $1 trillion a year. As soon as you tax carbon at the source, where you mine the coal, where you get the oil and gas out of the ground, you tax it there, all of a sudden you will see in our system the real cost of everything. One of the things that's bothered me is the talk about nuclear power as being carbon free. If you put a $100 tax on carbon, you will notice nuclear power will triple in cost, because there's a lot of carbon in a nuclear power system, the fuel chain, everything. So when you do that, you basically level the field and you have a huge revenue source that will then be used to weatherize, to do deep efficiency, and to put the incentives in place for all the renewables. So what you're doing is taxing the bad, putting it into the good, and making a huge delta between the two. And you would put in so much solar, so much wind, and you would do massive conservation and efficiency if you did that.
Yes, twofold. One is REV, Renewable Energy Vermont, a trade group, and recently they've included efficiency in the process of promoting that, which just makes sense because they reduce the load, reduce how much you need. I'd like to have you comment on that. One thing I want to comment on what Beth said, you talked about the energy efficiency is the most cost-effective, 80 cents on the dollar. But I find too many times people out in the field or out in the world don't understand conservation. David mentioned it. When I go to do an energy audit and I see a nice efficient motor, 96%, but it's running 24/7, I would take the least efficient motor and use it intelligently and save energy. And I don't see that going on out there. There's not a push. It's like this public service board doesn't allow you to count savings on behavioral changes. Those are 100% of those dollars are creating jobs and staying local. So I'd like to come in on that.
Al, I completely agree with you. And I will say, when I talk about efficiency, I interchangeably use conservation and efficiency. And David, I heard you starting to use efficiency, renewables, and conservation, and I think that's great. It's very true. Because, we talk about efficiency as doing the same with less. And as far as I'm concerned, if we don't start to learn how to do less with less overall, we will not meet the kinds of challenges that we have in terms of climate. So I agree. I think that conservation is incredibly important. And yes, it's true, Efficiency Vermont has some guidelines or some rules with some regulation that we can't do anything about, but we're fighting it to try to find a better way to value conservation every day. And it's absolutely critical to that bridge, as a part of that bridge.
Your question on REV and efficiency and renewables. I was one of the founding members of REV just for getting a renewable industry organized in Vermont. Efficiency is another group of folks that really need representation and a group to work as a trade. So we've been working together. One of the problems that we've had with efficiency and renewables and fossil fuels is the saying used to go, well, we're going to do some efficiency first, we'll burn a heck of a lot of fossils, and then we'll get around to doing some renewables someday. And then sometimes, more recently, is, well, we're going to do efficiency and then renewables will follow. No, we're at a point in time we have to do both efficiency deeply and renewables at the same time. We can't be either or, and we can't be fighting. So we want to all work together, but how do we do that and push our agenda at the state level in the State House? Maybe it's a common trade association, or we have two trade associations working side by side. But I think it's very, very important to have the trades, the companies represented in trade groups.
I agree, and I think that it's not just, and you need to throw transportation into that mix too. For the first, we've been VEIC, Vermont Energy Investment Corporation, has been a consulting organization for 25 years. It's been part of what we do, as well as implementation. And we've had clients all over the world, and we have more and more clients every day saying, we can't just look at electricity, we can't just look at fuels, we can't just look at conservation, we can't just look at transportation. We need someone to help us look at the whole thing all together, and that's really encouraging.
Renewable energy currently is a very, very small fraction of an energy source. So of course, we're trying to scale it up to better utilize it everywhere as we can. And so there's definitely hurdles in terms of economics reasons, but also from the technological side, I guess the big challenges that's facing wind and solar right now is intermittency, addressing that, as well as kind of saying how big of impact is actually making on the grid, and also whether that power is worth the money and relates back to the economic side. So how do you guys see the future for innovations in technology in the next few years, how that compares with, I guess, economic policy development, and how these will come together in the future to kind of really scale up the use of renewable energy?
Yeah, very good question about the variability of a lot of renewables. It turns out wind is variable, solar is variable, hydro is variable. Any renewable is a variable resource. But what's really interesting now is the discussion on what smart grid's about. Smart grid isn't just about a smart meter at your house. Smart grid really is about integrating all renewables together so that you don't need much storage in a system. And we have an electric system that was designed by Thomas Edison and Westinghouse over 100 years ago, and it's still being run the same way. And what I mean by that is it was designed to be a central station, very large coal plant or a nuke plant, and you have these lines that go out to the load. They're all one-way streets. It's a centralized, it's like a mainframe computer system. Well, what we have to do now is change it to two-way streets. And this is turning the whole utility industry on its head. These folks don't understand this. And they're still thinking some of the old way, but we have to now put in a grid system that's totally different. And it means distributed generation at the point of loads. It's the house, it's the businesses. And we're going to be generating power all over the place and making a system that works. So the variability of all the renewable sources, when you have large amounts of wind, solar, hydro, and some biomass, and then you use fossil fuels only for backup. We're running natural gas plants as base load plants. In other words, they're running 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. It's a total waste of a finite resource. We should outlaw natural gas plants to be running as base load. They should only back up renewables. And so if you put a system in the way we're thinking, a smart grid, the right way, all the renewable variability doesn't matter. It goes away. We won't do stupid things like pump storage because we have a street lighting program and we have pump storage for storing energy in the middle of the night because we have base load power plants. A nuke plant has to run 24 hours a day. You can't throttle a nuke. Coal plants take a long time to throttle. So we have these things in our system that were put in place because we had to give power away or store power in the middle of the night. So intermittency of wind, solar is not the problem. The problem is the system that we're operating that has to be changed.
I've worked on a lot of efficiency programs, and probably the coolest program that I worked on was one that Washington Electric implemented in the mid-90s. It was a residential new construction program that incentivized high-efficiency new construction. And the way they came up with the money for incentivizing the folks to build to a high standard was they charged a fee at the time the homeowner wanted to hook up their electricity. And then they would return that fee plus more if it met that standard. So it was kind of a fee-based type thing. And it was highly successful. It was like a 75–80% participation rate, which is 3 times what the voluntary programs are. It was only Washington Electric. It was proposed to do it for the rest of the state, but there was a huge amount of opposition from the home builders because it felt too aggressive, too mandatory. If we have many people in powerful places who hate mandatory programs, including our governor. Have you seen other programs like this be successful in other places? Do you have any hope for? I really like the concept of penalizing people who are doing the wrong thing to reward the people who are doing the right thing.
Right. I mean, it's kind of corollary to a carbon tax. I mean, it's all about rewarding good and trying to minimize bad by making it cost more money. I don't know of other programs other than what I mentioned in Germany. Ron, did you run any at the VEIC? No. I'm sure that I don't know. I don't know what other ones there are. And I know that in Vermont, one of the barriers is that Efficiency Vermont, up until recently, has had to focus most of its efforts and almost all of its incentives on electricity. And in Vermont, I think we're probably down to 1%, if that, of the people that heat with electricity. So it's another argument for why we have to look at buildings in a comprehensive way.
I was wondering about your statement about actually like a tax on carbon emissions. And how politically feasible is that? Because, you know, I was thinking of that like 30 years ago when you mentioned my brother, and it's like hitting a brick wall. And it's,
That brick wall's still there.
Well, it is not politically feasible today because, well, one of, I hate to say it, but I'm going to say it, that our democratic process doesn't work when we're up against physical limits, and the politicians have to take care of getting voted in. Cuba went through a huge problem with no oil after the fall of the Soviet Union. They had to go, they had to live without oil. They almost starved to death. They ended up growing their own food organically and got beyond this. But Castro, as a dictator, saved the country. Are we going to save ourselves in this democratic process? Maybe, maybe not, because the political will is not there to be real. You know, what politician's going to go out? You know, our government knows peak oil has happened. Who is campaigning saying, hey, we have an oil problem? No, nobody's going to say that. So we have politically right now, no, it's not going to happen. But real life is going to come, and we're going to have another crisis. Who knows what it is? You know, what are we going to do in Iran? What if they block the straits? If they block the straits, our oil prices triple overnight. They could be that dramatic because we're so sensitive to all this imported oil. We import over 60% of our oil. So politically, I think we have to start at the local and state level. We in Vermont have passed some laws in the last couple of years that are leading in the nation. We passed the first feed-in tariff law for electricity of any state. It's called standard offer. The reason it's not called feed-in tariff because it's a German term, and we in the United States can't face something that comes from overseas as being good. So we have to call it standard offer. We've done other things, but I think politically we can do more in a small state, and we have to do that to show the rest of the nation.
I just wanted to come back to the smart grid thing and talking about distributed generation. And I'm wondering where we're going to get the most bang for our buck in terms of whether it's better to all become energy producers or if we should be focusing on utility scale renewables.
I don't think it's an either or, it's both. We're going to do as much distributed as we can through net metering and other ways, but we're also going to do larger scale renewables. Small wind farms. Our wind farms in Vermont are teeny compared to the western wind farms of Texas, where they're talking 1,000 megawatts in one place. We're building wind farms of 10 to 60 megawatts. They're small and they're distributed. They're basically distributed because we don't have to feed into major transmission lines. They're fed into distribution lines. So we're going to have a great mix in Vermont, and we're going to have all this stuff all over. And one other comment on smart grid is we're going to have to get used to the idea that you're not going to be able to use your appliances when you think you're going to use them. They're all going to be controlled. We're going to control supply and demand. And our whole system was set up that the customer demand you don't control in real time. And that's going to change. And we're going to have to get used to the idea that you can't just go and turn on your dishwasher anytime you want and it's going to run. It may run 3 hours later, depending on what renewable and what the system has for power. Then you eliminate storage. So we're going to have to get over some of these things of like opting out of smart meters. Come on, guys, get real. We have a problem.
Yeah. The world runs and probably will always run on a whole host of manufactured, fabricated goods, including the electric trains that we envision and the propellers to wind turbines, etc. When we really run out of oil and coal, how will we manufacture those things? How will we get a hot enough furnace in a factory to manufacture those things?
Yeah, you're talking really about how much material do we have left in the world to make? How much steel, how much copper, how much iron, all this stuff to make things.
Or even recycle.
Or recycle, yeah.
How to get that hot flame.
I would like to ban the sale of SUVs. I want to take every SUV and repossess them and grind them up so we can make towers for wind turbines and frames for solar panels and do that. But instead, you know, we keep building the stuff we shouldn't be building. And we can't. We have a limited amount of these resources in the world. And we have to go and figure out what we want to do with these resources we have. And we should be building the wind turbines and the solar cells. And our consumerism has to drop down. We aren't going to have 100 pairs of shoes in the closet anymore. We are not going to do these things. And so how do we do it? I think we're going to have to set the pricing right or mandate or something. But it's coming really quickly.
Well, that speaks to the resources, but it doesn't speak to the actual manufacturing process.
Well, the manufacturing, I think, has to come back locally. In other words, we're not going to rely on China to make everything for us anymore. It's too far away. And actually, the Chinese pay the same amount for the natural resources, the raw steel and the raw copper and the raw aluminum, that we do in the US. All they do is put very cheap labor into it and ship it halfway around the world. But as oil prices get higher, we are not going to be able to afford to ship stuff halfway around the world both ways. And we're going to have to build a manufacturing base back in the United States.
But what's that manufacturing base going to run on? You need a hot flame to mold metal.
Mm-hmm. Well,
can we make a hot flame from solar electricity?
Yeah, the way we melt steel down now is electric furnaces, and they run on electricity. Aluminum is made in electric they use a lot of electricity. It turns out in the northwest of the United States, that's where our aluminum smelters are. They put in a tremendous amount of wind power out there during the crisis in California when electric rates were going high. So they were getting cheap electricity from hydro, but they ended up putting in wind because that was cheaper than paying the market price for gas and other sources of electricity. So we can use electricity to do the raw making of steel and copper and so on. But we have limited resources, so we're going to have to allocate them to the purposes of the renewable systems, really.
Yeah, I think we're going to have to make a lot of moral choices. And in the short term, which might be the next 50 to 100 years, we know how to use renewables for industrial processes. The materials themselves, eventually we are going to run out of them. And as we manufacture synthetic ones, and assuming the manufacturing process can be carbon-free and can come from renewables, resources that we need to make things, we need the time to do the research. We know how to generate the electricity for the processes, but we don't know what the processes are for making these new things. So that's why we need to make that transition so quickly and conserve now, because we will need fossil fuels for and those resources that we can't create in the lab. Need time to figure out how we're going to do that. And we're going to have to just use less. We're going to have to, I agree with David and with Alan, we're just going to have, I think, smaller houses and live in more dense communities and not drive cars, but find better ways to get around. I mean, really big picture.
Beth, you mentioned millions of jobs will need to weatherize, or we should have millions of jobs. And David, you said the jobs are going to need for installation. We're sitting here at UVM, higher education. What would you have for advice to, if I were dean or something, for our institutions in terms of growing a workforce?
Well, in terms of, I would start with an informed citizenry and student body that understands the implications of energy. So I think it's energy literacy. I think even the folks I work with at VEIC couldn't necessarily explain easily where electricity comes from and how do those electrons go from one place to the next. And I think that energy literacy, starting from from not birth, but maybe second grade, is something that we need to understand so that in every way that we tackle a problem, medical or scientific or, arts, that it's done with a sensitivity to what the resources are that are required. So I think that it's that kind of illiteracy that needs to be just pushed into every field.
It's a good question of here. UVM has bachelor's degrees, master's degrees, PhDs. We're going to need a lot less PhDs and a lot less master's degree folks. We're probably going to end up with a lot of 2-year degree type of folks. We're going to have to go back to the hands-on world and a workforce, because building these systems, maintaining this stuff is all hands-on. I think in the United States we've gotten really comfortable with this idea that we're all going to be sitting behind the computer and having a great salary, and we get in our car and we do all these things. That's all changing, and the future is different. I think UVM, if they want to be a research school, is going to have a heck of a lot less students, because I think UVM and the rest of the Vermont State college system should merge together their programs. The Vermont Techs, the Linden States, the Castleton States, we all have to start now figuring out how to grow organic food. We're going to have a lot more organic farmers. The idea that less than 2% of our population grows all of our food. Over 100 years ago, the majority of our population grew the food. And that we're going back there. And we're going to go kicking and screaming back there, because it's not going to be really happy for a lot of folks because of this way we're living. But we're in this sort of bubble right now that's unreal. We consume 5 times more energy per capita than the average person in the world. And we're the worst of the whole world. Europe uses half the energy per capita we do, and they live pretty good. But we have to hit those global warming targets, to decrease carbon by 80%, we got to decrease energy by 80%. And it's all the fossil energy that we aren't going to have that's going to force us to do that. Renewables will never replace fossil energy, never. So if you hear someone in the solar business or wind business say, oh, we can replace all of fossil energy, no, totally impossible. It's not going to happen. So we have to now have a life. And I think it's going to be a happier life. It's going to be a more localized life. We'll have communities again. We'll be together again. And it's going to be because we're all working side by side again.
I think that there are a lot of good programs that teach and mentor policy, community development, economic development, and I think those are really important, and we will need lots of those people. But like David said, the proportions are just kind of, we're trending in the wrong direction. I just learned that the average construction worker in the United States is 52 years old. That's a staggering fact to me, because who's going to repair and build our houses 10 years from now? It's just, we really need a young workforce of people who are skilled at those things and who can make a healthy living at doing those things, because they're valuable to society.
Just a few more questions, we'll take.
I just wanted to, David's last statement. If we had conservation, then if we had conservation, couldn't we then get by with renewables and nukes, phasing out nukes over 20 to 30 years? That's what Bill McKibben claimed. Bill McKibben spoke on campus a couple months ago, and that was his claim. Is agency right?
Well, forget the nukes anyways. If we do a massive conservation efficiency, so we decrease our energy intensity by 80%, we can provide the rest of the energy by all renewables. So I'm saying renewables will provide about 20% of what we use today at this peak of our energy consumption of fossils. So that's possible. But there's people promising that we can do 100% of what we use. That's totally impossible. And the point on nukes, and one other thing on nuclear power. Nuclear power, civilian nuclear reactors are your material source for nuclear bombs. So what's going to be the biggest disaster the world will ever see? It's either going to be a nuclear bombs or climate change and no energy. So this idea that we're going to use nuclear power and put reactors all over the world is, I think, the worst thing for the world. It's not going to work.
Yeah, I just have thinking about wind power and changes in efficiency and turbine design and the whole technology of wind is shifting to better pitch blades, longer blades. But if you put a wind project in and you estimate the life of the wind project to be 20, 25, 30 years, and you build a cost model and you present value it all out based on a certain efficiency and a certain load based on wind patterns, the sunk costs involved in that, the debt structuring of that, if there is a technological change in wind, leaves people little incentive to risk building wind parks with current technologies when it seems like the technological innovation in wind, within 3 or 4 years, I mean, there's that big new Belgian turbine that's much more efficient. And we got Noble across the lake. The load factor sucks. Their debt loading sucks. That to me, you've got these wind fields in Texas. They're big producers on load factors, but they're selling electricity at lower cost per kilowatt hour than the Noble place does across the lake.
Just kidding. And I can't reword what Richard just said.
Oh, sorry.
Well, the interesting thing is that there is this public perception that wind, solar, the technology is getting better so fast that we just wait. It's not. The reason large wind works and it's so workable today, and the technology seems like it's changing, but there's the efficiency of the wind turbine is about the same. There's a Betz limit. You can only get a little less than 60% of energy out of the wind. Modern wind turbines are hitting 50, 52%. They're all the same. The only thing that's changed is the turbines have gotten bigger in diameter, so they have more capacity each, and they've gotten higher off the ground. Being in the wind resource measurement business for 30 years, the wind blows higher above the ground. So by getting them up, you actually produce a lot more energy. So the taller towers is the technology change. But as far as financing and resistance to finance, no. There's massive amounts of wind going in the world. Solar is the same thing. There's solar gains every year in cell efficiencies, but they're on the order of 1/4 to 0.5% per year. We can't wait. The other thing is we can't wait. We can't wait until the solar cell is 1.5 times better than it is. There's an upper limit to solar cell efficiencies. And so it's not like Moore's law on computer chips, where you're going to have a doubling every 1.5 years of capacity. It's not going to happen because this is real world stuff. It's not semiconductors. We have to collect the energy from the wind and the sun. And it's really fixed how much energy hits a square meter of area from the sun or the swept area of a wind turbine. So we just have to change the incentives and move the markets to support wind and solar more than nuclear power and other things that are heavily subsidized.
So I just want to tell you about my battle scars with the carbon tax. So I've probably been the biggest advocate in the state. It started in 2005, and I said that you could pay for half the state budget with a $300 a ton tax, and they didn't want to hear that. And then I came back in 2009 and said, well, you could do $100 a ton, that would be $800 million. They didn't want to hear that. So then I went to the Blue Ribbon Tax Commission. I said, okay, well, how about 20? Because that will only raise gasoline 20 cents. They said, we're not going to consider a natural resource tax. So that's how far we've gotten in Vermont with the idea of a carbon tax. Nowhere. But my question is, heard a rumor, I know where I heard this, tell me if it's true, David. I heard that there's more jobs now in wind than coal in the United States.
Yeah, that's probably right. Modern coal mining doesn't use many people, you know, especially when you're blasting mountaintops away. It just takes a lot of dynamite, but it's really easy to get at. You know, 400 plus mountaintops in Appalachia have gone away. So, you know, coal isn't job intensive. And most fossil fuel extraction is not job intensive. It's energy intensive, not job intensive.
So, kind of piggybacking off what this next lady here said about some common in the financing of both renewables and energy efficiency, it seems like that's one of the biggest barriers that I see to doing these projects. Based on what Peter Walsh's office had said, the likelihood of this new bill that he's proposed for efficiency going through, it won't, even at its best likelihood, go through until 2013, where it would start to take effect. So, what are the options for consumers, instead of legislation, to have financial packages like the Sun Common, where they wouldn't have to feel that upfront cost to be there? Because then we'd be able to sell a lot more solar systems and efficiency packages.
Well, one that I mentioned earlier, PACE, someone knows what, property assessed clean energy, is something that makes a lot of sense. And it gets back to your first question about, we have the money now to pay for all of the energy that we're using. We have, and we're wasting it. So if we were able to, and we are, and we've done it at VEIC, and there are people who've done it all over the country, make energy improvements that save more than they cost, so that you are just taking the money that you're paying now for electricity or for gas or for coal or oil, not coal, and you were able to bring all of that forward or stretch out the payment for that. You know, right now, if you go to the bank to get a new furnace, for example, or a new boiler, you maybe have a year or 2 or 3 to pay for it. It's going to last 20 years probably. And so if you can stretch out the payments for that over 20 years, you will, over those 20 years, be able to pay what you're paying now, use much less energy, and then own the equipment at the end of the period of time. So it's really important that we change the structure of financing so that it's longer term and matches the term of the things that we're trying to finance. And property assessed clean energy PACE allows people to do that. It allows you to, it allows municipalities to finance energy improvements and renewables in homes and businesses in that municipality over a period of 20 or 30 years. And since you're not going to live in the house or own the business for 20 or 30 years, it passes on with the property. And it makes a whole lot of sense because the timing matches the value of the asset.
One other thing on financing, like home-based solar or wind, is we have a very conservative, basically old-school finance folks, the banks, the appraisers. We have a system based on an old way of doing things. And when you go to a bank and say, I want to finance a solar installation, they say, well, you're going to have to do a home equity loan, or you're going to have to do this. We have no embedded mechanisms right now to finance this. In Germany, the Germans give zero-interest loans from the federal government through a federal bank, basically, to finance all the solar they're doing and the wind. So they're much farther along in their view of what the future is. And you know, I'm dealing with local banks in my business. We put in 1,000 trackers in the state of Vermont. I finance most of them with a power purchase agreement, like a lease. But trying to get a bank to back this up very conservative. They say, oh, what about this? And, you know, what's your solar resource? And, you know, they're not used to it. It's brand new. And so we have to change how these folks think of things. And if you talk to a banker in their loan committee in Vermont, they said, well, you know, maybe this isn't the future. They don't understand peak oil. They don't understand we're in trouble. They're still loaning money for strip malls and housing developments. I said, it's kind of crazy. They don't get it yet. We have to get them to get it.
Okay, one question, and then we'll stop. You're the last one, make it a great one.
I think it's pretty good. On the supply side, I think you answered the question about stranding and investment in current technology pretty well. But on the supply side, the public utility system does a very nice job of moderating the effects of changes in the economy and conservation. But acknowledging that we need conservation and it's going to be very dynamic in the future, I have a hard time seeing how we're not going to have a lot of stranded efficiency investments. Taking, for example, Kunstler's house in the rural setting, and it gets a nice efficiency makeover, and then people decide they don't really want to drive that far to get to that house, and it's abandoned as the next urban museum piece or artifact, I guess, or archaeological artifact. What's the plan for avoiding that sort of situation?
It's a really good question, and I don't know. I mean, I know that we think about those kinds of things when we think about appliances or lighting and things like that, and you know, their useful life it's going to pay for itself in enough time that I don't think the investment's going to be stranded. Some of the, you know, you're asking a really big question, which is, what are we going to do with the suburbs? What are we going to do with rural America when we really can't afford to support it anymore? And I don't know the answer. Deb, I think they need a class on that at UVM. No, seriously, I mean, I think it's a big land use economics issue.
Yeah, the sunk cost in these old assets that we're trying to maximize the return on, at the end of the day, we're just going to have to write them off. And you know, the Vermont Yankee plant is an example of Entergy trying to maximize everything they can out of that. It's got to be just written off. We're going to have to write off a lot of things. And the sooner we do it, the better off we are. Because if we wait, we don't have the resources in the future. We got to write them off now, but nobody wants to do that.
And on that happy note, Tom Hudspeth would like to make an announcement.
This semester, the Rubenstein School has a seminar series on sustainability education, Thursday afternoons at 4 o'clock in 102 Aiken. On 3 weeks from tomorrow, on the 26th of April, Deb Rowe is going to be the speaker. She is at Oakland Community College, which is in the suburbs of Detroit. She did just what Dave was talking about. Not PhDs, not managers, but all those out-of-work employees from the auto industry. She provided thousands and thousands of jobs, training for those people that have led the job, doing energy audits, you know, insulation, carpentry, and all that. It's been a very successful program. She's a real dynamo in this area. So it's the 26th of April, 4 o'clock, 102 Aiken, Deborah Rowe, R-O-E. Thanks.
Thanks, Tom. Thank you very much. And I'd like to, thank you. I'd like to thank you, Beth, and you, David, for joining us this evening and for leading a really not happy, but looking forward kind of discussion that I think is leaving everybody with thoughts and hopefully some new ideas for ways that we can make changes in our own lives or in our own areas of work, in our own fields of knowledge. So thank you very much, and thank you all for attending tonight.